Picture this, a 17-year-old kid working alone in a backyard shed in Michigan builds a homemade nuclear reactor. Not a science fair project, not a toy, an actual functioning breeder reactor, using materials he gathered from smoke detectors, camping lanterns, and clock parts he bought at antique stores. Here's the thing, he almost pulled it off. And when the government finally found out, they didn't just shut him down, they called in a hazmat team in full radiation suits, and they buried his entire backyard as nuclear waste. This is the true story of David Hahn, the radioactive Boy Scout. David Hahn grew up in Commerce Township, Michigan in the 1980s and 90s. On the surface, he was just a normal kid. Curious, maybe a little obsessive, but normal. He loved science, not in a casual way, in an all-consuming way. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already taught himself chemistry from library books most adults couldn't understand. He joined the Boy Scouts, and he set his sights on one specific badge: atomic energy. Most kids who earned that badge did a simple experiment and moved on with their lives. David didn't move on. David got obsessed, and that obsession would take him somewhere no Boy Scout badge was ever supposed to lead. Somewhere that would eventually bring federal agents to his mother's front yard. So how does a teenager with no lab, no funding, and no formal training end up building something that terrifies nuclear scientists? That's exactly where this gets insane. It starts small. David begins collecting information, real information, from actual nuclear physics textbooks, from government pamphlets on radioactive materials, from anything he can get his hands on. And here's the part that should scare you. Almost everything he needed was legal to buy. Smoke detectors contain a tiny amount of a radioactive element called americium-241. Old camping lanterns use thorium in their mantles for that bright white glow. Clocks from before the 1970s often have radium paint on the dials. None of these things are illegal. None of them are locked away. They're sitting on store shelves and in junk drawers across America. David started buying them. Hundreds of smoke detectors, dozens of lantern mantles. He'd take them apart, piece by piece, extracting tiny amounts of radioactive material from each one. On their own, these amounts were harmless. But David wasn't thinking about on their own. He was thinking about what happens when you combine them. Wait, it gets worse. Because collecting the material was only step one. David wanted to build a breeder reactor. That's not a simple experiment. A breeder reactor is a device that actually creates more nuclear fuel than it uses by converting non-fissile material into fissile material through neutron bombardment. This is real nuclear engineering. Professional labs spend millions of dollars and use teams of scientists to build these things safely. David was doing it in a potting shed behind his mom's house. Here's the catch. He wasn't just some kid stumbling through this by accident. He was calculating. He wrote letters, pretending to be a physics teacher or a professional researcher, to nuclear regulatory agencies and even the Nuclear Regulatory Commission itself, asking detailed technical questions about reactor design. And people answered him. Nobody suspected that Professor Hahn was actually a teenager without even a driver's license yet. By age 17, David had gathered enough radioactive material to build what he called his reactor core, a small lead-lined box packed with radioactive material arranged in a specific pattern designed to sustain a nuclear reaction. He was chasing something called critical mass, the point where a nuclear reaction becomes self-sustaining. If you know anything about nuclear physics, you know that's the exact threshold that separates a science project from a genuine catastrophe. And this is where we need to talk about what David was actually risking, because it's bigger than just himself. Radiation doesn't stay where you put it. It doesn't respect property lines. If David's experiment had gone even slightly wrong, if he'd triggered a stronger reaction than he intended, the radioactive contamination wouldn't have stayed in that shed. It could have spread through the neighborhood. We're talking about a residential street with families, kids, pets, all within yards of an amateur nuclear experiment that even trained professionals approach with extreme caution. David worked at night, often wearing almost no protective gear. He was exposing himself to radiation levels far beyond safe limits, day after day, for months. His readings, using a Geiger counter, were spiking to levels that should have sent him straight to a hospital. But he kept going. Why? Because in his mind, he wasn't a reckless teenager. He was a scientist on the verge of an incredible breakthrough. He believed, genuinely believed, he was close to producing something history-making in his own backyard. Before we get to what actually happened when this all came crashing down, quick pause. If stories like this one, true events way stranger than fiction, are your thing, this is exactly what this channel is built around. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Okay, back to the shed. By the summer of 1994, David's readings were becoming dangerous, not just for him, but for anyone nearby. His makeshift reactor was producing radiation levels reportedly close to 1,000 times the normal background level. He didn't achieve full criticality. The reaction never became fully self-sustaining the way a real reactor does. But he'd built something powerful enough that continuing was a genuine gamble with real consequences. And then, almost by accident, it started to unravel. Police in Commerce Township got a call about a possible break-in. Someone was seen removing items from a car. When officers responded, they found David nearby, and in the trunk of his car, they discovered a strange, sealed metal box. When they asked him what was inside, David reportedly told them it might be a bomb.
I just talk sure.
So how do you think local police react to hearing that? They called in the county's hazardous materials team. And when specialists opened that box and ran their instruments over it, the readings didn't make sense. The radiation levels were so high that the equipment initially seemed broken. It wasn't broken, it was accurate. That's the shocking reveal at the center of this story. A homemade nuclear reactor built by a teenager sitting quietly in a shed for months, right in the middle of a normal American neighborhood, and nobody knew. So what happens after federal agencies find out a Boy Scout accidentally built a nuclear device? The Environmental Protection Agency got involved almost immediately. This wasn't a local cleanup. This became a full federal hazardous materials operation. Agents in full radiation suits descended on the Hahn family property. They didn't just remove David's equipment. They dismantled the shed itself, piece by piece, treating it as radioactive waste. Then they went further. They dug up the soil underneath and around where the shed had stood, packed it into more than 36 barrels, and shipped it off to a radioactive waste disposal facility in Utah. The same type of facility used for industrial nuclear waste. A backyard in a quiet Michigan suburb was officially classified as a nuclear cleanup site. Investigators later determined that David's experiments had pushed radiation levels in that yard to roughly 1,000 times normal background radiation. For context, that's the kind of level you'd expect to find near an actual nuclear incident site, not somebody's garden. And here's the part that still stuns people today. David never faced serious criminal charges for what he built. Officials determined he hadn't broken any specific law, mainly because almost everything he'd used was legally purchased, common household material. The truly dangerous part wasn't any single item. It was his knowledge and his willingness to combine them in a way nobody anticipated a teenager could or would. So what actually happened to David Hahn after his reactor was gone? This is where the story turns from wild curiosity into something much heavier. David's health had already been affected by his prolonged radiation exposure. He struggled afterward, both physically and emotionally. He eventually joined the Navy, but was later discharged after his past experiments came to light. In the years that followed, his life became difficult. He faced personal struggles that had nothing to do with fame or recognition, despite his story becoming widely known through journalist Ken Silverstein's reporting, which turned into a best-selling book and inspired a documentary. David Hahn died in 2016 at just 39 years old. His death wasn't caused by a dramatic nuclear accident. The official cause was linked to the combined effects of alcohol, fentanyl, and diphenhydramine in his system. But people close to the story, and many who investigated his life afterward, have pointed to the toll that months of radiation exposure likely took on his body over the years that followed. A slow, quiet consequence, showing up long after the headlines faded. And that's really the twist that makes this story so haunting. This wasn't a criminal mastermind. It wasn't a supervillain plot. It was a genuinely brilliant, curious kid who wanted nothing more than to impress his scout troop and prove he could do something extraordinary. He almost built an actual nuclear reactor using parts from a hardware store. He got closer to real nuclear fission than most licensed scientists ever will in their entire careers. And it happened in a potting shed behind a house on a completely ordinary street in the middle of America, while his neighbors mowed their lawns a few yards away, having absolutely no idea what was happening next door. David Hahn's case became so significant that it actually changed policy. It's part of why access to certain radioactive materials, like the ones found in old smoke detectors and antique clocks, is more tightly regulated today than it was in the 1990s. In a strange way, one teenager's backyard experiment helped rewrite the rules for an entire country. If this story blew your mind, make sure you hit subscribe, because unearthing history brings you a new, true, verified, jaw-dropping piece of history just like this one every single week. Drop a like if you can't believe this actually happened, and let me know in the comments if you found out your neighbor was doing something like this right next door. Would you even believe it? See you in the next one.